All right, what's up, guys? Chris Flick here, Chris Flick Podcast, episode 183. Today we got a guest here, Ben Chunko. We're at Grit Wrestling Club here in Hellertown, Pennsylvania. What's going on, man?
Not much.
Nothing.
How are you?
Good. I think I want to start this by saying, I don't know if not to get a little sentimental here, but when I, growing up in high school and all that stuff, there was a time when Chris Flick probably needed a little bit of guidance in the form of wrestling. And our families have known each other for a long time. And Ben was a coach that kind of came in and worked with me and a few friends who'd come down in the morning, lift some weights, spend time in the practice room, kind of just give a little bit of attention to somebody. And it was pretty impactful stuff that I still remember today and kind of use as a framework and a guide for, I think, coaching kids in general, where every kid on the team needs to kind of feel a coach, have his back, give him some support, show him some instruction. So I do want to tell you that you were one of those guys for me back when I was growing up. So,
hey, on top of that,
yeah.
I want to go back even further, and I think it's important to give back. And part of me is, one of my purposes to help people. And to go back even further, I want to thank your dad, Glenn Flick, for almost getting my start into weightlifting. So we grew up in the same neighborhood, and me and Dave Stauffer just coincidentally were getting into working out, and your dad was really into lifting weights, and he had a great gym in the basement, and just out of the kindness of his heart helped us kind of taught us how to train and opened up his gym to us. And that was one of the early impacts on me of volunteering and helping people out, and I'm still grateful to this day. I learned a lot from him and how to track workouts and how to chart your workouts and how to train.
That's a good point. So. That's like a thing from his era too, the tracking and all that. I'll listen to guys that have been involved in weightlifting. I still got my manuals from 35 years ago or whatever. When I was in high school, I know exactly what I did, and he's meticulous with that tracking.
Keep it in a notebook, and through college, and when I was really training at my highest level, I kept a notebook. Yeah. And
well, he'll be happy to hear that. Then I'll have to let him know.
Learned a lot from him.
Build Glenn's ego a little bit. He'll feel good. He's changing the world, I guess.
Yep.
All right. It was kind of already alluded to. So your family, even your dad, your uncle, they were involved in coaching sports, and then I think my dad would volunteer. My brother and I we got into wrestling. I think that's how my dad and your uncle became pretty tight. Through that, got to know you guys. Yep. So going back then, wrestling has always kind of been a part of your life there. Yeah. And at this point, if we were going to talk, let's go back then. Let's go back in the day.
Yeah.
All right. So the sport of wrestling, growing up, it's something you did, right?
Sure.
Your father was a coach.
Yeah, he was my youth coach.
Yep. And then you seem to almost fall on that path. You're a coach now, and you coach your own kids. So how was it for you having your father coach you back when you were growing up?
That's a good question. I think my dad had me when he was 21 years old. So he was young. I think maybe early on there were some growing pains. But I think he figured it out pretty quick. I think early on he was a little demanding, some good, some bad, and he learned quickly along the way. Yeah. And he was a good guy to have as my coach. Yeah. And I think it's there's a certain balance with showing you care and then also being demanding at the same time. Right. Because you are the parent and you want them to excel, but not to the point that it's going to ruin the relationship and all that. But one thing I've learned about my dad, though, I think maybe it still sticks to this day, is how to run a room. He ran a great room, and he kept the attention of young kids very well. Yeah. And when he said something, it was, you listened.
I think we had some good coaches.
Yeah, very, very much so.
Because there's a lot of people. Yeah. There was in the community that we're in. Wrestling was big. Yep. When your father was in high school, it was 1970s or winning state championships. So I think when we were growing up, some of those guys were still in the area, and they were now parents, and they were helping out. Yeah. My
uncle stepped in. I think my 6th grade year, he did a great job, and we had some good coaches along the way. Yeah.
Yeah, because I even remember Gary Weaver was the first district champ maybe with wrestling, and his kids
was down there in the room.
Yeah, always. Yeah, it was cool, and I think we're fortunate there. Yeah. So I guess being born in the right town matters. And then as we got, the club that you have here is called Grit. Yeah. All right. Why did you choose the name?
I was having a super difficult time finding a name. Yeah. And I'm coming up with all these, I'm writing things down. And I'm a book nerd, so I read a lot of personal development stuff, and in that genre.
Yeah.
But I just was having a hard time finding a name, and I'm like running names by people and everything, and I have to thank Julie Santoro. She's the mother of one of the kids that I've coached, Max Santoro, and he's in the club and he wrestles for Saucon Valley. But she threw out a couple different names, and she thought, what about Grit? And I'm like, oh my God, that's one of my favorite books. And at first I was like, do I name it that? And then I was, the more that I thought about it, I'm like, this is perfect.
Yeah.
It personifies myself, how my career, the success that I had in the sport, and what I want our club to be about. So Grit is a book by
Angela Duckworth.
Angela Duckworth.
Yeah, I just listened to it this week, so it's fresh in my mind. Now, I think there's two things there. One, I think I want to eventually talk about the culture that you want to create here, and it seems like Grit's a big part of that.
Yeah.
But then, if we did backtrack a bit, I mean, your career here, you have the article posted here. Growing up, you would say that you were a late bloomer, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
the
so
layest possible.
Freshman year, what did you weigh?
103 pounds.
103 pounds as a freshman.
Yeah.
And then when did you make that big jump then in terms of like, I guess we could say like that puberty developmental thing? Was it in high school?
Barely.
Barely.
So not until I would say it started like before, like into my junior year was that when so I remember, and I have like my old driver's license. When I was turning 16 and I got my driver's license, I was 5'3".
Wow.
And going into my junior year, I started growing then. And then I remember I grew 2 inches after high school, which is very rare. I was on the college team and I had a knee issue, and the doctor said, "Hey Ben, how old are you?" I said, 18 years old. He said, "Your growth plates aren't done closing yet." So
that's interesting news to get, yeah.
So so no, it was like later in high school and into college even.
So to talk about the name Grit, I mean, we're looking at things like perseverance and being in it for the long haul, having stamina. It's a marathon, not a sprint type of thing. So you were not getting to college in wrestling due to some sort of physically imposing, some genetic gifts that you've had, right?
No.
It was probably learning those, the hard work, the technique, all of that stuff that got you there. So it's like what is perceived as a potential disadvantage, lack of puberty, I guess, built the foundation to who you kind of became then in college.
Yeah.
And I think that's something I've written about that, and I try to talk about that with some parents just because kids are like getting cut from sports at like age 9, and you're like, what the heck's going on here? Hey, your kid's not cut out for this club, go do this, maybe play a different sport. And I think you're an example of why kids shouldn't accept it, number one. If it's something they want to pursue it. But then also as a coach, like, hey man, just let these kids develop at their own rate.
I never thought of it that way, but did you ever read David and Goliath?
Yeah, it is that. Yeah. That's the book.
So the advantages of disadvantages.
Yeah.
So you could argue that the disadvantage of me during high school turned into somewhat of an advantage in college, where it made me. And I think even I started wrestling up at 174 eventually in college, and I was used to wrestling, a smaller, faster speed, and that was another thing that possibly helped me.
And you started, so when you went to college, you just said, you finished at 174, which is what, the third, or the fourth high, whatever, there's only 3 weights beyond that, so you're one of the bigger guys in the room.
Yeah.
When you went to college, where were you? What were you wrestling?
141.
141.
So I wrestled 141 my freshman year, and I cut a lot of weight. Like I ended up starting to cut a lot of weight. Then my sophomore year, I wrestled 149. I ended up cutting a lot of weight as well.
Yeah.
And it was a negative. It was good because I made the team.
Yeah.
So in your mind you think, wow, I'm making progress, but at the same time it was rough.
Yeah. And I think that thought there, or that lesson potentially, you probably didn't know when you were in college, but then when I was in high school and you were there, I think when I was a junior, I wrestled 152 and lost like 20 pounds after football to make that. And then the next year I was weighing like 168. And you told me to just wrestle 171. And I might have been in the 70s, but then wrestling starts, you lose weight. I was probably in the high 60s.
Yeah.
One coach is like, hey, you're going to go down to 160. And then I don't know if that was a decision, but we started lifting weights and I started eating big breakfasts. Yeah. And I ended up weighing like 175, and it worked out. So like I think you were at the forefront of that a little bit too, based off of your experience.
Yeah, I think from what I'm finding is I'm trying not to judge all kids by my experience.
Yeah.
But what there is there's you know, a lot of times people don't need to cut as much weight as they thought. And if you look at my college career, had losing records my first 2 seasons when I was cutting a ton of weight.
Yeah.
And then I almost not by accident, but I just said, you know, I almost had enough. And I said, I'm done. I'm just going to wrestle close to my natural weight and see how things go. And my junior year, I was wrestling up and I was going to come down. I was going to make that drop down, and I ended up beating a ranked opponent. And I was like, holy smokes, I'm better wrestling closer to my natural weight than I was cutting a bunch of weight.
Yeah.
So it was almost not by accident, but I stayed up after that and had better success.
And then, I mean, you went from, you know, a high school kid that, I mean, what was your record in high school? Do you know?
I was above average, I think. You know, I could characterize my high school as a district finalist. My junior and senior year, I was starting to catch on, but I would say I had a series of bad luck towards, like in the postseason. So I was on that level where I beat several state place winners. My senior year, I beat, you know, the week before states, I beat the eventual state finalist, but then he beat me. So I was kind of teetering on that level, but wrestling Division I is completely a whole nother level above that. But no, I mean, I was an above average high school wrestler.
And when you look at your college career then, I mean, you were a match away from being an All-American.
Yeah.
So you were, your best wrestling was not as a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old. It was,
no.
I mean, you were what, 22, 23?
22.
22.
Yeah, 21, 22.
And I think that's an important thing to kind of keep in mind too. I don't know if you have these conversations at all with parents, but it's like, let's not be the best at 16, 17, 18.
Yeah.
Let's try to, you know, learn the, whatever it may be, the foundational skills, those mental things that might have helped you. You know, that grit, that mindset that you're always available to develop.
Yeah.
And then eventually, I think, you know,
Well,
the physical stuff will
you
come.
want to say it's a marathon, not a sprint,
Yeah.
right? So like a lot of times, parents, kids, they want that immediate result, immediate success, and sometimes it just doesn't happen overnight, and
Yeah.
it takes months, years of development to get to the point where, you know, you're getting to a level where you maybe want to be.
Yeah. Speaking of books and all that, have you read? Do you know that book, Mindset, Carol Dweck? Fixed
One of my
Mindset?
favorites. Yeah.
So in her, one of the things that I got is like how you define yourself matters. So a group of kids, they each took an exam, and it was an easy exam. They all scored pretty well. One was praised for wow, you must be really smart. It was 6 words of praise. It was, you must be really smart at, whatever.
Yep.
You must be smart. You showed great effort.
Right.
The effort group, as the study went on, they did a second test. Who wants to do the hard test? Who wants to do the easy test? The effort group, 91% wanted to do the hard test. Only a slight majority wanted to do the hard test in the smart group. It's like they didn't want their newfound identity of being smart and skilled to be challenged. They wanted to kind of coast it.
Yeah.
Third test was incredibly hard. The effort group enjoyed the challenges. You know, the smart group decided, maybe I'm not as smart as I thought I was, and it kind of affected them. Then they did a fourth test that was similar to test number 1, and there was a 30% increase in the effort group and a 20% decrease in scores in the smart group, all based of, in their mind, 6 words of praise. And they ended up repeating it 5 times because they didn't believe in the results were always the same.
And I read that book. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
And it was very impactful for me as a parent and as a coach. So I'm very careful with my words.
Yeah.
And parenting, it's the same thing. What's important to getting them, you know, to helping them. I think it's praising the effort and not praising, you know, a perceived talent.
Right.
And especially down in this room when you're here, it's good work, way to work hard for it, you know, and because the first time you tell a kid who is talented fails, the failure is more dramatic in their mind.
Yeah, it is.
You know.
They start second guessing themselves, you know. And as a parent, then let's talk about that. You have 3 boys; they're all involved in the sport, right?
Yes.
So the oldest is
Carter. He's in 8th grade.
you have, what is it, 8th?
8th, 7th, and 6th.
Oh wow, 8th, 7th, and 6th.
Yeah.
I don't know how to go with this as opposed to being a parent, being dad, and also being coach.
Yeah.
We were kind of joking about this. I mean,
Yeah.
not that it matters. I mean, my daughter's 4, but I'm like, she'll come out and work with me, and she'll think that she's a coach.
Yeah.
Just because she sees her dad maybe telling kids she'll be like trying to tell somebody what to do, or if I'm like, hey Emmy, if you want to work out with us here, you have to do this, and she's like not wanting to do it, figuring out who's dad and who's coach. How was that for you?
So early on, I would say I was very apprehensive.
Yeah.
And I remember Dave Spurk, Carter was 7.5. Was he in first grade?
Yeah.
I think first grade, and he got a little later start than most kids because I was a little nervous to get him into the sport, and he was in other stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Why were you nervous about the sport? We were more worried about how you would handle.
Yeah, part of me didn't want to be.
Or?
Part of me didn't want to be the coach and the parent at the same time, because there is a dynamic, and I think now I'm over that, and I think we have a great relationship, and it's good. But
we'll say this too, though. Like I had a moment when we figured out we were gonna have a daughter. I was kind of happy because I wasn't going to be involved in the guys stuff, the football. I coached football and wrestling.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right. There's going to be none of that pressure from me, even if it was unconscious. Like,
right.
I don't think I'm going to be pushing her into anything.
Right.
I'm going to be a little bit, I don't know. It's just different.
Well, there's two ways of thinking about it. Some like high-level college coaches, they say, I want to be dad, I don't want to be coach.
Yes.
And then there's other coaches who say, what better person to pass on knowledge to my kid than myself?
You know that Kelly Starrett, the supple leopard guy?
Yeah.
That's what he has 2 daughters, and he was like, I am not coaching.
Right.
Then eventually that question came up, like, hey, you're like this world-renowned physical therapist. Like,
Right.
Why aren't you helping your kids?
Right. Yanni's dad, Yanni Diakomahalis.
Yeah.
He was having a conversation with Jordan Burroughs, and Jordan Burroughs was on the fence whether he wanted to be actively involved in coaching his kids.
Oh yeah.
He's an Olympic champion.
Greatest, yeah.
Right. And Yanni's dad was like, you have a gift, So there's different ways to look at it.
Yeah.
Spurk, the president of the wrestling club, talked me into coaching the novice a bunch of years back. And coincidentally, Carter made the JV team. So I didn't even get to coach him. I ended up coaching the novice without him in the room. And but that kind of just, with him starting to get into it and having kind of a really starting to like it without me being around, really opened up the gates for me to start helping out, with me the comfort level, and then away we went. And wrestling is my passion. It's one of the things that I love, and I think once that it started open, we just off and ran. So that's when I started coaching the youth.
And you probably won't bring it up, but he is one of the better kids in the state and even in the country, right? I mean, he's ranked very highly. So I remember you a couple years ago said that he just had this drive to do it.
Yes.
And it was not necessarily anything that you had to do with. And I think about I was listening to, it was Doc Rivers, the basketball coach. He's like, I never went to practice. He's like, this is I love going to play basketball. It was never practice to me. I was never forced to go.
From an early age, he was, I could just remember him when we were going to different clubs.
Yeah.
He was, had his book bag, his practice bag waiting by the car. He was really into it. He was excited for it.
Yeah.
When they asked him what he wanted to be when he was in school, and he said, a wrestler.
Yeah.
He just loved it. And it kind of took it was made things easier on me.
His drive was there internally. He had the intrinsic motivation to do it.
And he still has it, and it's growing.
And they I don't mean. These are just guys that I've seen. I mean, even Wayne Gretzky. I was watching the documentary yesterday just to get my mind on some things, and he's like, I didn't want to go watch movies with my friends. I just want to go out back and hit hit some shots on the water, on the ice. It's not that it was just something that he wanted to do. He's like, I love baseball too, and when it was baseball season, I was into baseball. He's like, I just wasn't as good at that. Whatever he was doing, he would just kind of get immersed in it, and I don't know. It was just intrinsically something that he wanted to do, and that's hard to pull out of people. I mean, I don't even know if you can really. I don't know what it takes to get somebody to want to do that themselves.
I don't know. I think I had I wouldn't call it an obsessive personality, but when I do something, I'm all in.
Yeah.
Hence this wrestling club, and and I think Carter kind of, I don't know if it's genetic or what, but when he was a young kid, he played with garbage trucks, and he had almost an obsession with garbage trucks like I've never seen before.
Right.
And we almost had to be like, hey buddy, quit playing with the garbage truck. He would wake himself up at 6 in the morning on a Monday morning because he knew it was garbage day.
Really?
Yeah.
Now,
And-
we talked about this before we went on. Like, I was like, hey, is there any qualities do you think in wrestling? And there's this quote, it's like, sports are a double-edged sword. Swung in the right way, if you have an obsession, an addiction, whatever, swung in the right way could be for good. Swung in the other way, and we hear these like sad stories of guys that we grew up with where they're getting in trouble with the law, maybe they're getting addicted to other things, and like all of that stuff there. So you see that little drive. What do you think there's any qualities like that? Like, is that quality required? You know,
I don't know if it's required. I think that
you said you had it. Do you think it's healthy?
can be.
As
Yeah,
an
I
adult
think
now, do you find yourself at all struggling with like, I need to tone it back and anything, or like, you have it under control maybe?
I think I have it under control. I think
It's identified as something, you know what it, you know you have it.
I just would always be coming up with a goal or a game plan, and like part of that was like, it's something that I think it could be very healthy. I think it'd be healthy from a career standpoint, a family standpoint, a life standpoint. But some people can kind of steer it into a different direction.
Yeah. And then do you think failure, not able to reach your goals, does that affect you, or are you just back to the drawing board like the name of the club says, you know? And do you see that in your son too then, I guess?
Yeah, I
it's
think
like you're losing.
you know, we have from the very beginning had expectations of how to act and what, you know, nobody's going to go undefeated, and how to act after loss,
Yeah.
and you know, how to turn, like, this whole club is about turning negatives into positives. And when we talk about, like, you know, behaviors and, you know, using your, you know, your lifestyle down here, like a lot of times part of the message for grit, or part of it, is turning it into life lessons. Like, you know, how can you use your habits and behaviors down here to make yourself a better person?
Yeah.
How can you turning a loss into something even greater, right? So, you know,
And that, I think, is important too. I mean, parent or a coach or whatever, if you're working with younger kids, you know, I think stuff like early education matters, because you could start planting those seeds in there.
Yeah.
And like if you are the youth coach, like having those lessons in there.
Yeah.
I only just see like the daughters in preschool, and I see the stuff they talk to them about. It's like adult type stuff and how to handle different situations. I'm just like, I'm glad we have this school, because, you know, they're doing something that I wasn't even aware of.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that happens too with coaching, right? It's like, we have to talk about the important stuff, and the earlier you could get that in there.
I think one of the big things is, like, from a youth sports standpoint, is focusing less on the result, the win or the loss, and more on development. And if you could do that and truly do that, and as a parent too, and as a coach,
Yeah.
right? A lot of parents
Everybody
and coaches,
across the board.
and then it's a trickle down effect. You see the parent get all pissed off after a loss and like yelling at their kids and acting mad. Then it's a mimic to behavior. The kid
Of course,
will
yeah.
start doing that. And if the parent or the coach has composure and, you know, acts in a certain manner, oftentimes it'll help things.
No, that whole thing too, like I never even know that was a way to coach until, like, I think it was like Dave Kroll, you know,
Yeah.
he was at Wilson, and then
Big fan of his.
Nazareth, right?
Yeah.
And it's just like, Tony Dungy then, you know, as I was coaching football, wrote this book, and it was about, it's called Quiet Strength, you know? It's like, we prepared all week. If I'm doing coaching on Sunday, then I didn't do my job throughout
Right.
the week to get these kids prepared. And he's like, his dad was a teacher, and that was his whole mindset. He's like, I have to do everything to get these kids prepared to get an A. Like, every student can get an A. It's my job to get them there,
Yeah.
you know? So, always like that. And, you know, so I was looking for this John Wooden. You know, we're talking about the parents, right? And
Yeah.
mimicking behavior. You're going to treat the ref bad.
Yeah.
The kid's going to treat the ref bad.
Right.
Or you're going to blame a coach for something, they're going to blame.
Yeah.
And I think it was John Wooden, some along the lines of like, the moment that you start blaming, you know, outside things, like that's when you don't become a winner. It's
Right.
like when you start to point fingers at other things and not
Yeah.
being, you know, you need to be in control of what's going on, I think. So.
Well, it's almost back to the, you know, even growth mindset. If you're blaming a loss on an external factor instead of using the loss to teach a lesson and say like, hey, let's get better next time.
Yeah.
You know.
And then with being a parent now, all three boys are wrestling. They're at different stages.
Mm-hmm.
All three boys have different interests, or any of them alike, or are they all kind of in their own? They're all their own kids.
You know, they're all their own kids.
Yeah.
And it's different. I mean, I maybe you could. Maybe from an outsider looking in, you'd say that there's a lot of similarities, but just as a parent, you know, you notice all the differences. I have, there's Carter, Gavin, and Luke.
Yep.
Gavin's my middle son, and Luke is the youngest. So I would say they all have different levels of interest. Or maybe Luke's really starting to develop a.
He seems he's got a little fire in him.
He's starting to get there where he's, really starting to take the sport seriously. He's putting in a lot of work.
Did I ever tell you what he said to me when he came and worked out? It was like, we're doing this pull-up challenge. You hang for 30 seconds, do a pull-up. All right, hang for 30, do a pull-up. You want to get as many as possible. And he was like, I might have seen him once or twice.
Yeah.
And he's like, I was like, how many are you going to get? He's like, or whatever. He asked how many I did or something. It was like 4.
Mm-hmm.
And then I asked him, like, what about you? And he was like, oh, I'm going to get 5 just so I can beat you. And I was like, oh, all right, man. Let's see what you got. I don't know what he ended up doing. They probably ended up getting to 4. But yeah, he was ready to go. Seems competitive.
Yeah, he's competitive. He'll down here. He'll be cracking jokes. He's the comedian of the bunch.
Yeah.
Man, is he funny. Just at a dinner table, he'll make it light. He keeps it entertaining down here, but he also really works hard. And my middle son, Gavin, he's just a man of many different interests.
Yeah.
So wrestling is one of them. And he does really well. He's having a great year for our middle school program. But, I think if he were here, he would say that wrestling doesn't define, like as much of a person as maybe Carter does, right? Yeah. So he's really good. He's an unbelievable artist. So from a really young age, he was, creating and making, and something that I have no, background in, and neither does Kelly really. But GC Art, you got to look at his YouTube channel. Shout out to GC Art.
Having multiple things, right? And it led me to think about when you ever read about the Ivy League schools and kids that are there, they go like it was in the Malcolm Gladwell books, right?
Bottom happy quartile.
Yeah, but depression rates are higher because they're the big fish at their school. And they go there now, they're getting B's and C's. Yep. And they found that like if you were an athlete.
The bottom happy quartile.
Is that what Yeah. So if you had another thing, if you weren't just solely identifying with being the intelligent person, if you were an athlete with it, if you were involved in a club or whatever it may be, those kids saw much less depression or anxiousness, whatever it may be, than those that identify with only one thing. I know, just 100%. About Gavin.
Yeah, so with him, I would say that he's pretty awesome too, because whatever he puts his mind to, he can do. It's pretty incredible with his art. And just for Christmas, we got like these desks that we had to put together. And he's like, I'll do it. And he took it upstairs and
that's perfect.
And I'm like, holy crap,
Is that a desk that has like 1,000 pieces?
Yeah, he could figure things out. And I was like, oh my Lord, this is awesome.
You 3 hours,
So like you said, you never know when, like even with development, So like for me, it's my job to be dad and to kind of guide him along in the pace that he wants to go. And guide Carter along at the pace that he wants to go. And like I like the analogy of a string, right? So like if you, as a parent, if you push your kid, if you think about pushing a long string, right? And your kid's at the other end, you push it, it's really not going anywhere. But for me, it's like guiding and pulling. So like I'll give them enough. I'll give them the opportunity. Like if you want to do art, if you want to take more classes, let's go here. I'll pull them in that direction. If you want to come to the wrestling club, it's more of a pulling than like a push.
Yeah, and there's this guy John O'Sullivan does this Changing the Game project. It's all about sports parenting basically, and like it's not like how can I change my kid? It's like how can I change myself as a parent to like best serve the child. And that's kind of what it sounds like. It's like he's leading the charge. They have their interests. They're going to go whatever, and you're just going to be like, that's good. That's good to know.
But see, like for him with my competitive nature, with his art, it's something because like I was like, oh my God, you're good. Like let's get you in art school. Let's do it. And I'm like, let's do classes, and he's like, no, I just want to. It's like his kind of like
outlet or something.
Outlet.
Yeah. That's cool.
So.
Yeah, everybody probably needs some of that. And
Right.
You talked about your other son cracking jokes in here,
Yeah.
having a good atmosphere, like keeping things light. Is that kind of the culture that you want in here with Greg?
Yes. Yeah.
Right? Any other things, like we're in a community too that is strong in wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at community, you look at culture. Those things are kind of like part of it all. Like how do you shape the room? I guess. How do you want
A
your
lot
room?
of times I'll start practice by giving a little talk, and like a couple things. Like number one, I want good people down here,
Yeah.
and I want good kids to become good adults. And a lot of times we talk about wrestling, but we also talk about other things.
Yeah.
Like, you know, hey, be a good brother. You know, be a good friend down here. So I'm very attuned to what's happening in the room as far as I pay attention to like the interactions between kids and make sure it's positive. We want good kids. We want good, you know, sons and daughters, and good students and respectful people. So that's very important to me. Down here, as far as the practice structure, we started off with like sometimes a little talk, but we keep it to. There's different things as a youth coach and like somebody, not even youth coach, even through junior high and high school. So there's certain clubs that will, you know, make you tough. And for me, it's always been about, I'm going to teach you how to wrestle.
Yeah.
And we're looking at skill development and working on skill development more so than, you know, making you tough type of an approach. Now, we go hard, believe me.
I don't even like you saying that, because then it's almost implying that you don't. Your kids are tough, but
Yeah.
running people into the ground. I'll just talk about football, so it's a different world.
Right.
I coach with guys that just want to pound the stadium steps or something. It's like,
Right.
this is not making us better at football. All
Right.
we're doing a bunch of bench press reps for something, and it's just like making them do more push-ups, and it's just like, this is not going to help us on the football field. You might end up hurting somebody. You're going to break somebody down, discourage a kid from the sport, maybe.
Yeah.
Like, those are all negative qualities, and what are we going to get out of this?
Right.
Where's the carryover into sports? Probably not there, but.
No, I want one of my goals is when a kid's 30 years old and he looks back at his time at the club, I want him to think about like, we're looking to develop lifelong learners and lifelong people, like fans of the sport, right?
Yeah.
And we watch film, and the coaching staff, I have great help.
Yeah.
I have Brian Israel and Kent Lane, and even Steve Middich comes, and he started helping out recently. But the people who are down here I would consider are all lifelong learners.
Yeah.
And we try and spur a curiosity of the sport where you're figuring out, it's like you're putting together pieces of a puzzle, and you're learning positions, and you go home and you think about it, or you think about where you got beat, and you come back, and this is like our lab, right?
Yeah.
So
Then we
that's
talked-
a big part of the practice, you know, like what we want to kind of encourage down here.
And with that, it's like we talked about one of the local guys, Darian Cruz, won a national championship against another local guy from
Lezak, yeah.
So maybe a minute ago, you know, he gets in on a shot, whatever happens, he does something crazy, gets a takedown, wins like 4-2 or something like that. After the match, they ask him about it. He's like, you know what, my older brother, we're just in there play wrestling and, you know, just basically screwing around. Like he literally said, we're just screwing around. He showed me this thing, and he ended up winning using that in a national championship. Using that play to win a national championship. So like, you have this unstructured mindset, you have a structured mindset.
Right.
You know, we're gonna hammer 25 high crotches, right?
Yeah.
Like, that might get you better at the high crotch in the short term, but in the long term, if you keep the big picture in mind, it's that playful type stuff. And you know, you mentioned Dave Stauffer earlier.
Yeah.
When I coached with him the 1 year in junior high, that was the first I ever heard of it. It's like 10 years ago, and he's just like, he literally scheduled like play wrestling in there.
Yeah.
And you said now it's like, it's a part of
Yeah,
it.
so it's a big part of our practice plan. So
Yeah.
basically, I would say maybe 20, since after I was done competing, this really wasn't a thing when I was still competing.
What was going on in your college rooms? high school
Drilling,
rooms?
live wrestling.
Drilling,
Yeah,
live
it was like, so
wrestling.
drilling basically is, for people who don't really know, it's you hit a move like in a perfect manner that it would be hit in a match with, like, it happens very rare that way, right? So, and then there's live wrestling where you would just fight and scrap and get better through that way. Somewhere along in the last 20 years or so, I think the first time I've heard of it was from like overseas, the Russians. What they would do is, it was called play wrestling. They call it sparring. You call it different things, but basically it would be like, it's basically like wrestling live, but without as much resistance. So if you could picture, like if I could picture, I've probably drilled a high crotch to a double about 5,000 times in my lifetime.
Yes.
The amount of times that I hit it perfectly in a match were very few. So it would be like you get in there, then you'd have to figure it out, right? So what sparring and play wrestling does is it puts you in those positions more often, and you get better in those different scenarios. So like for our practice plan, a lot of times what we'll do is, if we're focusing on top or bottom or neutral, we'll do a warm-up, and then in the first 10 minutes of like it's an extended warm-up basically, where we say, okay, we're going to spar in this position.
Yeah.
And okay, the spar is designed for the top guy. The top guy is looking for turns, but the bottom guy, you got to give him a feel. Try and get out, try and move around, try and give him, so you're going through different, like more realistic situations.
Tell that kid on bottom to get creative, right?
Yeah,
some different, some funky stuff.
Roll around,
you, make it fun. Yeah.
Yep. So like if we're sparring for the offensive guy on his feet, the defensive guy's going to sit the corner, give him a feel, like sprawl, put him in those positions where they're going to be there.
Yeah. And I like the name sparring as opposed to playing.
Right.
Sparring sounds like...
And that's one of the lessons that I've learned with youth, is especially the younger kids, you say play wrestling, and then the little 8-year-old's going to be running around the room like that. But it's important for them to learn.
And it's there was a German soccer, right? There's this. They said they tried to identify what was making their players, the kids that made the national team and didn't make the national team. This is after they won the World Cup, whatever, 6 to 8 years ago. I don't know when it was, but they said the thing that they found was unstructured practice time and short-sided games, meaning 2-on-1, you were 1-on-1 with the goalie, beat the guy. These little small things that are, you always have the ball at your foot, and you have to, you got to get creative. And I said Wayne Gretzky said, like, creativity was a survival mechanism for me. I was undersized. I had to do things a little bit differently. I had to figure out ways that were going to work for me. And I think with playing, with sparring, like that's exactly what you're getting.
Well, some of our high-level guys, like especially some of our junior high guys, like Carter and a couple of his workout partners, they're really, really good. And during those spar goes, one of the other advantages of now compared to 20 years ago is technology and video. And the kids who watch a lot of video, so Carter's starting to hit certain shots that Yanni Diakomahalis does, or certain setups to a shot, and we didn't really show it down here. But during the spar sessions, during the creative times, he'll just start doing this little drag setup, and you could really start growing from finding what works, finding what doesn't.
I think too, you said like 20 years ago, man, like those Askrens came on, they were like funky, what's his nickname, right?
Yeah,
they kind of once in those funks, right?
Yeah.
So like when that stuff started happening too, that looks like play. That was probably like playful sparring.
Yeah.
To me, guys are rolling on the ground, you're grabbing a leg, you're trying to rip it over their head, and I think that kind of changed the sport. And I also noticed too, I remember, it's been a while, maybe like when Cruz was in there. Remember there's that guy Nashon Garrett.
Yeah.
I remember he wrestled this guy, I think it was Delgado from Cal or something.
Oh yeah.
And
the funk roll.
Yeah, those guys, like, it was the most athletic thing I've ever seen. I'm like, this sport is like, you read a Dan Gable book, from 1980s and the 90s, like, these guys just work. They were like tough dudes, strong. Because now the sport is like, it's athletic. It is, I think it's more exciting.
It is.
Yeah, it's great. And I think the sparring part of it probably is playing a role in.
And that's where the scrambling really comes into play. But
that even shows up in everything, right? I mean, you watch UFC or something like that. It's the scrambles that are gonna like make or break you sometimes.
Yeah.
And there's dire consequences there. You get put in the wrong spot, you might get knocked out. But like even with wrestling, man, it's those little scramble situations, and it's like match are probably gonna be the determining factor. Trying to think of what else then. I wanted to talk about culture. We got sidetracked on that stuff, but I mean, we're in a good community, trying to create a good culture.
So culture. So back to culture. I think we talked about it before, but growth mindset and the culture that I want to. That one of the main things that I want out of the club is being the best version of you. Okay, so I think if you're competing against somebody else or sometimes that can be not negative, or I think it could be limiting in an
Yeah, I
extent.
think it is 100%.
And I think if you are just trying to maximize yourself, and if the goal is to be the best person, the best version of you that you could be, and what am I doing everything that I can to be the best version of me? I think there's more of a happiness that comes to it, where there's a fulfillment where you know that you're going to be the best. You're doing whatever you can to be the best.
Yeah,
and
you set the bar. You know, you kind of put that across the board for everybody to kind of know and understand that, and then other kids are going to see, hey, you know, these great kids here, they're okay after they lost. They're getting better. Their mindset is like, I'm going to get on board with that too. I think, right?
Yeah.
It's like
no, it's contagious.
Yeah.
I mean, it's you know, it could be contagious in a good way and a bad way, and we try and make it contagious in a good way.
Well, I think in grit too, that was that swimmer, I think his name was like Rowdy Gaines or whatever. He's like, he went somewhere and they were like, everybody's getting up at 4 a.m. to swim. So I was like, I better get up at 4 a.m. and go train because everybody else is doing it. So once you can set an expectation, whether it's with training or even just with the mindset part of things, like I imagine it catches on. It starts at the top though. I mean, you know, and then it just starts trickling down in all the other levels. So having great coaches is probably...
We got great guys. So
good.
Kent Lane and Izzy, those are my two main helpers. Man, they do a great job, and they're starting to buy in more and more, and they love the message. And Middich, Coach Middich is new. He's he's an assistant coach at Rutgers, so he gets to come down in the room once a week or so. But the staff, like, it's great to work with good people.
Good. And you talked about how your dad was able to run a room. You have a good room, and I always think it's like you got to be able to work the room, and you need to have coaches that are willing to work the room. It's like we can't all just coach the top end guys.
No.
You know, we need some guys on the staff to that.
Oh
like
yeah.
I talked about this recently with, like, I was coaching junior high. There's like 3 coaches, and there was like 3 new big kids came out, and they didn't know anything.
Yeah.
And like my job was like, hey, let's roll it on with the big guys and try to teach them like 3 things.
Right.
And I was cool with it. Those kids got some attention, and like it worked for them. And then another guy was working with the lightweights, and like somebody was teaching the high end kids, and somebody was teaching the low end kids. You know, and it was like everybody needed to understand that that it is a team, and all of these kids need the same amount of, not the same, well, yeah, I'll just say the same amount of instruction. They need the attention. They need to feel like they're a part of this thing. You can't have a culture, a winning culture, if they don't.
We want to be a club that's there for everybody,
Yeah.
right? So, like, I think for me personally, maybe with my, you know, not lack of success, but like development or improvement, like there's certain coaches that I would say love, or it appeals to them to coach the high end talent, right? And it almost appeals to me just to see a kid improve more, like whether he's from like the low end to maybe a medium, you know.
If you raise the floor,
right,
the whole club's going to be better, because then those kids are pushing the other guys in the room.
So for me, it's really not a matter of who's going to be like a state champ or nationally ranked. For me, I just love to see effort down here. You know?
Yeah, I mean, there was like I think it was a football story. Troy Aikman, whatever, Jimmy Johnson's trying to give this fired up speech, and they're like, dude, you don't have to say that. Like, we're ready. Like the top end guys, they were ready. They didn't need that. He's like, but the bottom half of the roster, they might need that little spark.
Right.
And not with motivational words, but like just with more instruction.
Yeah,
like those top end guys, we're keeping an eye on them. We're not ignoring them, but like they're good. You know.
Right.
Let's get the other guys going. I don't know. I always felt that way. If you can take somebody from a 3 to a 7.
Yeah.
That might feel better than going from a 7.5 to an 8, you know, where you just add a little bit to somebody.
Right.
That's how I feel anyway on the matter. But where do you see it going then? I know you're going to be opening up a new facility for Grit, right? It's over on 378.
Yeah.
Is it on the same side, the right side of that complex, like Max?
No, it's on the left.
Oh, right.
So I've been down here for a little over 2 years.
Yeah.
Kevin Branco with Main Street
Gym.
Gym
Him a couple months ago.
He's been awesome.
Yeah.
He's been great. Yeah, I'm super thankful for him. He's a great guy. He runs great business. I'm super thankful for him to give me the opportunity to be down here. The reality is, I wish we had more space. I'd be here forever. So this is coming up on my busy season, where in the spring, the school programs kind of let out, and we will get really busy. So we're moving into a 5,200 square foot facility out off of the route, that Saucon Valley Square shopping center.
How big is this facility?
I think this is 2,000 square feet,
so
2,200 square feet. So it's a lot bigger, and there's no posts. These posts were really, you know, it was an obstacle.
The obstacle's not the way. Like that book says, not in here anyway.
Right. So So yeah, we're moving over there. I think we'll have a lot more room to do some good. I think we're just going to continue to grow and provide a good service for the surrounding areas. Another thing about grit that I don't know if we really discussed, but one of the things that I wanted to be for was to supplement school programs.
Yeah.
So a lot of clubs in the past have looked to act as a replacement for school programs, especially at the youth level. And I never wanted to do that. I'm kind of old school in the manner where I think it's great to have like our local Valley Elementary League,
Yeah.
where your kid wrestles for your team and builds those relationships and those friendships with your buddies from school.
Yeah.
And what we want to be is a supplement to that. And when there's off days or when there's like down parts of the season, that's when we're here.
Yeah.
And so maybe we sacrifice a little bit of revenue. I really don't care. We don't do it for the money, but we do it. We want to do good for the kids in their club and the community and the surrounding area. But yeah, so that's another part of their club that I think is really important. We want to work with school programs, work with coaches. I often, if there's coaches in the area that wants to come down and help, as long as they're background checked, certified, and everything,
Yeah.
we allow them to come down. We welcome them and make it almost like a community-based effort where everybody's making each other better.
Well, I feel like people want all these other requirements. Like, I'll just talk about the gym, not the club, just
Yeah.
because this is what I experience. It's like they think that I'm trying to get some sort of long-term commitment. I'm like, hey, you got off from school one day, come work out. I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, you're playing a sport and you're off for 3 days. Like, you
Sure.
want to bring your older sibling with the younger one. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Sure.
Right.
No, you don't need to sign up for a freaking.
No, I mean,
lifetime. You already
there's
signed
going
your
to
life
be
away.
kids who, and as with anything, the more you put in, the better you're going to get. But we realize that there are kids who wrestle, they're out for the team, and then there's wrestlers, right? So there's varying levels of commitment. We're here for all.
Everybody.
Yeah.
With the, I always had this thought, like, liability stuff, concussions started hitting football, sports aren't being carried, clubs are rising, and like sport participation for the schools are down. I had this like theory a couple years ago that like, I think club sports might be replacing, like, do you think schools will eventually just be like, we're not even gonna offer athletics because of X, Y, and Z? Like, they can't keep coaches either. Like, I know locally schools can't hire, they're having a hard time hiring, and they're having a hard time keeping coaches.
I hope not.
I know.
I mean, like I said, I think about memories from high school, right? And it was all like my classmates and
Yeah. Different backgrounds too. It's
and
like,
some of my best friends from this day, like the kids that were on the Saucon Valley team that I went to high school with.
Yeah.
I run businesses with, and I'm friends with, and best man's at my wedding and everything.
Yeah.
So it's really, I would hate it got to that point. I see it. I see a lack of loyalty to your school program, and I don't know. I mean, I have mixed feelings. I mean, I think I'll always be in the sport, and I think things are going to continue to evolve. It's hard being a high school coach.
Oh, yeah.
Nowadays compared to,
like the
30
gym
years ago.
teacher that coached football afterwards, whatever. Now it's like, I'll speak for football because I was in that for a while, like 30 to 40 hours a week
Yeah.
for me, in addition to just normal work stuff.
Right.
So, and I wasn't the head coach. I ended up working with the JVs and all that, but as an assistant, that's what it was for me.
Yeah.
Now, wrestling, it's like, if you're not gonna commit full time, you're not gonna have a good program.
Right.
So, if you want to be 500, I don't know. That's how I think anyway.
Yeah.
I mean,
like point counterpoint, I think
Yeah.
Saucon Valley, they're a good program, and one of the things that they've done really well was work with multi-sport athletes and work with the community. So, they've gotten a lot of mileage out of building relationships with, having football players wrestle. So.
no, I was just saying, as the coach itself, it's a lot. It's a lot of time requirement. If you're not going to put in the time as a high school wrestling coach, head coach, then your program's going to suffer.
Oh yeah.
And the guys, it will be that Dan Gable will outwork them all. If you're the coach that is willing to put in the more hours, your team is probably going to benefit from that. So that's what I meant by all of that. Yeah.
Right.
That, like, to be a head coach is demanding. and especially if you want to be there for one, especially if you want to have some success.
Yeah, there's liability issues, and there's so much more to it. Even with wrestling nowadays, with the descent plans and like certifications of certain weights and everything, there's a lot more paperwork involved.
Yeah.
And you know.
Yeah, that is part of it. It's like the head coach is more about managing stuff sometimes than all the other stuff. Now you brought up the weight stuff, so we're gonna go rapid here.
Yeah.
A few things to kind of finish up.
Sure.
These are things that parents come up to me.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask the wrestling club coach because we'll just say you might be more equipped to answer these. Kid say he's gonna be like 7 or 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
If he's gonna make the team next year, he's gonna have to cut weight.
Yeah.
What do you tell that parent?
How much weight?
4 pounds.
Yeah,
70 to 60, whatever.
No, I mean, here's my take on it. How old? 8?
Let's just say if the kid's wants to be, let's go with 8.
So that makes them
8-year-old
second,
cut
third
weight.
grade.
2nd or 3rd grade, hey, you might be able to make a varsity lineup if you lose 3 pounds.
Yeah,
that's what the coach just told the parents.
No, I would disagree with that. I think
If the coach told you that as a parent,
I would disagree with that.
okay.
Yeah.
And you as a parent would just be like,
yeah, I think
I'm not
there's a way to maybe eat light a little bit and skip a breakfast. I think that's fine, and then eat right after a weigh-in. Okay,
Yeah.
where it's teaching a kid to kind of have a little discipline. You didn't eat the second you woke up. You have a little discipline to follow plans and follow direction. I could see that. But as far as losing like a significant percentage of your body weight, I think
not doing it.
No. I mean, I think part of the burnout in wrestling in our sport is correlated 100% to your weight and cutting weight too much for too many events.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think? Did you read that Sports Gene book?
Sure did. Yeah.
I think in that he mentioned that like gymnasts eventually will just have their bodies will develop later along.
Yeah.
Because they were at some sort of deficit.
Yeah.
While they were competing. Do you think wrestling has that at all, where gymnastics a little more extreme?
Possibly.
Yeah, I don't know. That thought came to mind with the.
Possibly. I think when they're doing it kind of a little bit more extreme.
Yeah.
But maybe
some people think wrestling is extreme.
Yeah.
Like Marisa, for example, she didn't grow up around wrestling. She just thinks it's absolutely crazy to have a 3rd grader even think about losing 2 pounds.
Yeah.
So to a lot of parents,
yeah, it's a perception,
yeah.
Right? So I don't know if it would. That'd be a good question. Maybe in certain cases it could.
Yeah.
Maybe in certain cases it could, stunt your overall height potential. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe it could delay you growing for a little bit.
Well, that sports team said that it did not affect there's no way of really knowing, I guess, how tall they would have been if they didn't do it, but they just said that the girls would have their, peak height,
later.
Yeah. I was just wondering. I wonder if that happened.
Back to that, I think I think cutting weight in wrestling is the hot topic, right? So, you got to limit it as much as as a parent. I'd limit it as much as you possibly can. With my boys, we've really wrestled close to what they weighed.
Yeah.
Can I say that? Now there's a cruel reality to it on the other side. So if the kid weighs 81 pounds and the weight classes are 81 and 85. So you come to a point where if you could weigh 81 at night, you lose a pound overnight, you step on the scale, that's okay. But if you're like cutting like some weight to like going from 84 to 80, if you're close to the next weight, just wrestle the next weight.
Yeah.
And we've sacrificed the big thing as a parent, and this is what I tell a lot of people. It's like you have to be prepared to sacrifice results, because once you start getting invested in here, the parents get invested too, and they want to see their kids succeed, right? So like every parent wants to see their kids succeed. But when I have conversations with parents, it's like, listen, you may have to sacrifice like short-term results. You're gonna sacrifice short-term results by wrestling closer to your natural weight. But what are we actually doing this for? Are we doing this to win a title when you're in fourth grade, or to have a lifelong love of the sport and potentially do well in high school and even college?
Yeah. So that almost seems to be the perfect answer then, because like who cares if they're not on varsity right now,
Right.
because you might be
Work harder,
risking them.
get better at wrestling.
Yeah,
you know?
and you might be that act of losing weight might discourage this kid from ever wrestling beyond this year.
Right.
You know, it could
Right.
make it so miserable, and all this
Yeah.
outside pressure from coaches, parents, just to get on the scale and all that crap. It could totally ruin it. So,
Yeah.
the other thing I wanted to ask was, no, this is another thought I had. I feel like back in the day, if you had a kid that, say you didn't have a kid at heavyweight,
Yeah.
you would have that kid that was in 4th grade that was very short
Yeah.
and maybe a little chubby. He would be the heavyweight for varsity.
Right.
And he would get beat up, and he might not ever really wrestle again because you're kind of just throwing him out there to the wolves.
Yeah.
Now it seems to be that they're trying to protect kids a little bit and protect their
Too much.
protect their I don't know if it's self-esteem or whatever it may be, but
Yeah.
like allowing them to wrestle novice
Right.
or JV as opposed
Yeah.
to
It's a
taking
great
their lumps, so to speak.
That's a great talking point.
Obviously, there's
Yeah.
different.
Theories on that?
No, just all the circumstances are different with every kid.
Yeah.
But how do you think about that, and how do you manage that? I mean, the sport of wrestling, you're going to get beat up
Sport of wrestling is like
at
life,
some point,
right?
guaranteed.
Yeah.
Maybe more than once, probably a couple hundred times.
Yeah.
Do you want to prolong that? Do you want to not do too much of that too young? You know, things like that. How do you? It is what it is. You know, you
Yeah.
put a lineup out there, and that's what you're going with.
I always was, when it came to that regard, I would try and fill the lineup.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was in youth, my first year of varsity, I was 1-7.
Yeah.
And the one match I won, I think I won because of a locked hands call or something like that. But my first varsity match, I wrestled Dan Tashner. I got pinned in 13 seconds. Like he had I think he had a tattoo in 6th grade.
Yeah.
But anyway, in my mind, I was the best kid at my weight for my team. In the school of Saucon Valley, I was the best, 60-pounder or whatever the weight may be, and it was an honor to be varsity. When I coached youth, I tried to kind of promote that and say, like, listen, this is life. You might be, undersized, or you might be taking some lumps now, but if you stick with it, you're going to do well.
So that's a good way to think about it. My gut instinct was in agreement with that. Like, hey, just the kid's gonna have to wrestle varsity.
Yeah,
but
and it's life.
I
and
didn't have that. I didn't have that under that thought behind.
Sometimes you gotta learn about losing,
It's for
and
the
like
team.
life. What's life, right? You get knocked down, and you gotta, it's a life lesson.
The team part of it, though,
and it's a team part.
Caught my ear because it's like, hey, this is for the team.
Yeah.
You're the best at this spot.
Yep.
We're either forfeit or we're gonna give you an opportunity.
So we've had,
to help us.
and like, I coached the Saucon youth team for a number of years, and we've tried to do that as much as we can. Now there's parents who want to, and I respect any parents.
Of course.
They know their kids better. I always say the parent knows their kid better than the coach, because they're with them all the time, and so we respect wishes. But if I try and get the kids to go out there.
Like the default setting is we're filling the lineup, and then
Yeah.
if there's any issues, you'll entertain those
Right.
conversations. Difference coaching youth, difference coaching club, and for the school organization.
Okay, so for the school, you're coaching kids who are having varying or more of a varying level of commitment. Okay, so there's kids who just are out for the team because their parents signed them up, and that they're going to be there for a couple months. There's more behavior issues, I would say, that you have to deal with, and it's more seasonal, right? For a club, it's more, a lot of the kids who find their way to me have more of a dedication in some sense, and they're more consistent. So what I've found is that, where can I make the biggest difference, right? Where can I provide the most value? And I really love just what I'm doing now, to the extent where I have more months out of the year to kind of help develop kids and be an impact and be a role model and try and, get them to develop. So
Part two then would be club parents versus school parents.
Well, here's the thing. Here's the difference. Okay, so if the club parents, this is what I love about it. It's basically if you don't like with a club parent, if you don't like my approach or my rationale or the way I run the practice, see you later.
Yeah.
Right? So the challenging part to the school program is if there's an issue, I'm still their coach no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to work through more issues, I would say.
And,
That's kind of the difference, the main difference. And that's why I love the club. Is like, the parents and the club parents who are down here, I'm not holding a gun to their head, right? They're down here because they want to be down here.
Yeah.
So.
Trying to think I think that might be it on my end. You got any questions for me, man?
Now, the one thing that you had on the part was competitions versus practice. We could talk about that.
Yeah, I didn't even think, this wasn't even on my radar until like, I don't know when, but I'm trying to think of some of these conversations. I used to rent off of Ben, so he would pop in, we'd have these conversations, so I'm like, trying to think back to things that we talked about before that was really interesting that now I kind of take for granted because I know your thoughts on it and you kind of know mine, and I wanted to bring some of those back up. So competitions, so practice time versus competition time. Mm-hmm. In America, that ratio was probably more like one or two practices during the week, then 2 to 3 games on the weekend for say a sport like soccer.
Right.
Whereas in other countries, it would be maybe 4 practices to 1 game.
Right.
So that there was more time in training, not to there was more time in developing skills in a training environment. Mm-hmm. What's your take on this? Do you see? I mean, wrestling. This is something I want to ask too. It's like, is there an off season in the sport? And then how do you manage the training if they are going to wrestle for a while, 2/3 of the year, whatever? Like, how do you manage the training versus competition?
I think breaks are important.
Yeah.
I think so. The higher level you get, you'll see less and less people take a break.
Yeah.
And they'll take a day off, and and I think for youth kids, a couple months off is good. A month off here and there is good. So we would do kind of like when Carter started getting serious and we started getting into it, we would still take like a month or 2 off here and there, take breaks. The older you get, the less that people are willing, the highest level kids want to take off. I still think it's important to take a couple weeks off here and there after major competitions and just let the body reset and let your mind reset. One thing that I have maybe changed my mindset on slightly is I think, in the developmental years, you need to be practicing more than you compete. So you need to have more practice time, significantly more practice time than the competitions. But then some people, I think, almost take it to another extreme where they don't compete. Well, we're not competing until junior high, or we're not competing as much until, getting close to this age. And I would push back on that and look at some competitions at a younger age as practice.
Yeah.
And I looked at that, and as long as you're not like ultimately dead set on the result, I think that competition could be viewed as practice. Wrestling in a setting where you're practicing learning where the edge of the mat is, hearing a whistle, watching the score and executing at the same time. So like when you're down here in a wrestling room, I think that there's not all those external factors of a match. So you almost have to practice how to wrestle a match. And sometimes when you err to the side of caution too much, certain those like savvy in-match, periods get kind of like, lost a little bit, or you have to get that development later in your career. So
some other,
so
sports, 1 or 2 big competitions a year, and the other stuff could be like a dress rehearsal type thing where you're going there to practice.
I've studied a lot of this, and like one of the things was Russians. Well, they don't compete as often. Well, they don't formally compete in like major tournaments, right? But every Saturday is a match day, and they have all the kids from the local areas come and they'll ref matches. Yeah. Well, no, they're not handing out trophies or whatever, but they're learning the score. They're learning to hear a whistle, to see a ref put up points. And that was one of the things that I took away where, when my kids started wrestling and I started coaching wrestling, it's like, hey, we need to compete so these kids kind of learn how to practice how to compete.
Yeah.
So.
No, that's a good point. And then even the style of training too. You know, you see what another country's doing, but it's only like always on the surface. I feel like you don't actually know what the heck's going on over there.
No.
It seems like Russia's like always at the they're always the example for some reason of crazy training ideas. But
well,
they
they're
also
the
get
best.
paid.
They've been the best. They've been the best. You know, for a number of years.
But they also get handpicked, I guess, at the higher, like they're, hey, you're going to be like if you're wrestling, you're training to wrestle.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
We don't have that. Now's that big thing with like.
We're starting to have it.
Yeah,
now.
yeah.
Now there's like these RTCs, and it's starting to get. The
There's
past
money,
10
right? I mean,
years.
there's just money for the athletes.
Yeah, the past 10 years has been really good for the development of wrestling.
That was a Foxcatcher, man.
Yeah.
DuPont. He wasn't he the first guy? Wasn't that the big thing? I mean,
Well, that's
USA Wrestling needed money.
Yeah, we had a golden era back then because of money, right? And then now we're kind of seeing a resurgence of there was the Living the Dream Fund, so we started like compensating people who won medals, and then now these regional like training centers, so colleges are starting to help fund senior level athletes.
Nice.
So it's been really good.
Anything else, man?
Yeah, I think that's
We
it.
good? All
Yeah,
right.
we're good.
Cool. Thanks for doing this.
So yeah, absolutely.
That's good. All right, man.
So
See you.
yep.
Alrighty.